Chapter 8 today. We don't have much to cover, just a few items. And the handout that I had given the other day when we were calculating, the last thing we did was the GDP deflator. We just have one more calculation to do on that page, and then I know you just have a couple little things on that outline I had given you to fill out, and then that's it for Chapter 8. So then we're going to head into Chapter 9, which is basically unemployment and inflation. Spend today and Tuesday in those chapters. I will give you review materials on Tuesday for the test, which will be the Tuesday that week after we come back. So yes, I'm having class next Tuesday. I know some people have already asked. The university is still open on that day. Break doesn't start till Wednesday, so I follow the rules and I have class the day before break. If break started Tuesday, you'd all went off on Monday. So it has to be a day, right, where it's like the last day, so Tuesday's it. But anyway, I don't necessarily expect high attendance, but I am finishing up the chapter and going to be talking about the test, so keep that in mind. Okay, so we had looked at GDP, and we talked about the differences between nominal and real GDP. So real GDP is based on some base year price, nominal is based on today's values or prices. Then we calculated the deflator. And we did that in our handout. And then the last thing that I kind of covered quickly before we left on Tuesday was how to calculate that rate of inflation. And I wrote the formula up here in the corner real fast. So anytime we want to figure out a percentage change in anything, okay, and that's, the rate of inflation, the rate at which your tuition went up, the rate at which your electric bill increased, anything like that, your salary, your bonus, we talked about that, or raises, things like that, is to take year 2 minus year 1 divided by year 1, and if you want to convert it to a decimal in your calculator, you multiply it by 100. You can leave it as a decimal, right, or convert it to a percentage, from a decimal, you multiply it by 100. But obviously, I use year 2, year 1, just to indicate that you're comparing some current year 2 being the current year, to last year. So you could call this current year minus last year divided by last year. It's just easier for me to say year 2 minus year 1 divided by year 1, okay? So however you choose to word that. So what we do with GDP, when we use GDP to calculate the rate of inflation, and actually we'll see this a little bit more in Chapter 9, is we have to look at that GDP deflator. And we're going to assume that 2014 is year 2 and 2013 is year 1 in this case, right? So we're going to take year 2, or the GDP deflator of 108.3, minus year 1, which is the GDP deflator for 2013, and divide by 2013's GDP deflator. I'm going to stop saying that. Times 100, and we get 1.5. So it just says price levels rose. And we said the definition of inflation is increasing prices. So that's basically what that is. That's an inflation rate of 1.5%. We tend to think of inflation sometimes negatively, but actually inflation, modest amounts of inflation are good because they're signs that the economy is doing what? Growing. They are signs the economy is growing. So we kind of, as consumers, say we like when prices fall, but periods of falling prices, bless you, periods of falling prices for too long of a period is not a good thing. It's a bad thing, actually, right? And so your book actually talks about that a little bit. I don't get into that too much, but basically that's what we have there. So do you guys have your GDP review papers we did the other day? Who needs one? Anyone need one? Okay. So we had done the first few calculations, and I wrote them on the board, and I didn't write them anywhere else. And you're gonna have to give me the GDP deflator for 2000. Oh no, you didn't. Actually, no, we don't. Number 1 and 2 don't have anything to do with each other. So back up. So number 1, we had an economy with baseballs and footballs. That's good. All right. And then for number 2, we actually are given nominal and real GDPs for 2 years. So we actually have to calculate the deflator, and then we're going to calculate the rate of inflation. All right. So we're going to just follow, these formulas are up here, so we might as well look at them while we do this. So I'm on number 2 of the handout. We already did number 1. And we have nominal GDP for 2011. And we have real GDP for 2011. So you have those two amounts there. If we look at the formula, we're just taking nominal and dividing it by real, right? So 15,533.8, right? And again, that's in billions. Does it matter if I say billions? It doesn't really matter, because as long as I'm dividing by two numbers that are expressed the same way, I don't need all the zeros, right? I can drop all the zeros and I'll still be okay. Divided by the real GDP, which is 11,800.5. Right? We talked about this really being more, like we said, it's an index or an indice. It's really expressed, in that case, that's 106.7%, 108.3%. From what? From the base year. Because the base year is going to have a deflator of really technically 100. And so if we were actually to do that for the base year, so we're comparing this back to the base year. Okay, so enough talking, let's do some calculating here. So 15,533.8 divided by 11,800.5, right? Multiply that by 100 to move that decimal where I need it to be, and that's 131.64. All right, and that's just would be comparing that number back to the base year. So you have to consider the base year maybe many years ago, right? You don't really have that information here in this problem. But if the base year is 2000, for example, then that's a good number of years. So what we're looking at is growth from year to year. So let's do the same. This was 2011. We're going to do the same for 2012, right? We're going to take that 16,244.6, right? And we're going to divide it by 12,128.5. Now, when we review for the test, I'll give you a couple of these problems because these are going to be on the test. So we have some calculations in these two chapters, and I take advantage of that on the test, actually. And so instead of short answer on this next test, you'll have some problems that you'll have to calculate, okay? All right, so let's do this here. And if anybody out there with a calculator wants to make sure I'm not making any mistakes, that would be awesome. Okay. Now you can round that to one decimal place, so we could say 131.6 or 133.9. I don't really care as long as you're consistent. So what I mean by consistent is don't give me this first deflator as 131.64 and then give me this one as 133.9. Do them both the same, and it won't matter. Okay, because that'll account for or take care of rounding errors if you're consistent. All right, so we had to do that before we could actually calculate the inflation rate. So now I'm going to take, if I'm plugging numbers into this formula, this is going to be 2012 minus 2011 divided by 2011 times 100, right? So I'm just going to use the answers that I have here. 2012 is 133.94 minus 2011 of 131.64 minus divided by 131.64 times 100. So what we want to know is what was the price increase? Remember, when we talked about price stability as an indicator of how well the economy is doing. So 1.75%. Is that what you get? Somewhere around there. Again, if you rounded differently than I did, you might have a slightly different answer. That's fine. Bless you. What's important there is consistency. Questions? No? Nobody has any questions? Okay. Those really aren't that bad, right? So three-step process. So again, we'll revisit that. I actually have a handout, a review sheet with problems on it that'll mimic the problems I give you on the test. And so you'll get a chance to look at that again. Okay, so we're just about done with this chapter. This is the last section, and if you have the handout that I'd given you, I guess, when did I give those out? I don't even know when I gave those out. So anyway, that was sections 8.2 to 8.4. We kind of looked at it in an outline form. Does anybody need one of those? Anybody? No? Okay. This was really the last section. So, we've been talking about one way that we measure GDP, the total output in the economy. But there are other ways. And the Bureau of Economic Analysis, right, the BEA, has multiple methods they can use. And what they do is they use other methods and they do some comparisons, okay? Because these are tricky calculations. There is no way to be 100% accurate on things like this because you're getting data from people who may not be reporting things accurately. And so you have to have some alternatives here for comparison's sake. So this is the last part of that PowerPoint or that handout for you guys. Describe other measures of total production and total income. And we said, why is it total income and total production? Because really total income represents the consumer, right? And total production represents the producer. And so if we're making more money, we're spending more money. And if we're spending more money, then firms are making more products for us to buy. So they do go hand in hand. So you can look at it from either viewpoint. So we have something called gross national product. And instead of GDP, gross domestic, right? This is production performed by citizens of a nation, including overseas production. So GDP does not currently include that. So this is another measurement. National income is GDP minus the consumption of fixed capital. For example, it's GDP minus depreciation. So we talked about fixed investments, and we said those were things like equipment and machinery, buildings for companies, for firms. Well, they depreciate those things. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, in accounting, you learn about depreciation. And that's really the loss of value that things like machinery, equipment, and buildings actually experience. Loss of value. The longer you have something, the older it is, the less it's worth, right? That makes sense, of course. So we actually subtract that out if we want that calculation. Personal income, which is income received by households like yours and mine, but it includes transfer payments. Remember, what is a transfer payment? Somebody give me an example what that was? Social Security, right? So they were government payments to recipients who were giving nothing in return. So we said, Social Security we just get for being a certain age. We're not doing anything special, right? The personal income actually does include transfer payments, but it excludes a firm's retained earnings. And then disposable personal income. Personal income minus personal tax payments. Well, disposable means what I actually had to spend. And we all know that we do not get to keep our gross wages, right? We subtract out our taxes. So if I make $500 a week and $100 comes out for taxes, how much do I have to spend each week? I only have $400 to spend, right? That's my disposable income, not my gross income. Do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, well, about the transfer payments and Social Security, don't the workers put that in?
That's not how it works, actually. So if I'm having Social Security withheld from my paycheck right now, okay? If you have a job, so are you. But that is not going into a little account with my name on it, just waiting for me to retire and withdraw from it.
It's going into a box.
It's going to pay benefits right now. So anybody that's currently receiving Social Security, they're getting that money from me, from you, people that are currently working. So when we talk about it being unfunded right now, here's the problem. So we talked about generations. So the generation above me are the baby boomers, okay? Well, there are a lot more baby boomers than there are of my generation. So now my generation is trying to support a bunch of people who are now eligible for Social Security. And if there's more of them than there are of me, that's why it's underfunded, right? There's not enough of me working to support them. However, I'm kind of lucky because there's a lot more of you than there are of me. So my generation is smaller than yours. So when I get to retirement age, you guys will just be paying my Social Security. It'll be okay, right? And actually, even the generation below you is the largest right now. So I think it's kind of interesting how that works. But anyway, I'm sure there's other reasons why it's underfunded that we're not going to get into. But that's basically how it works. So it isn't money it's not money taken out of my paycheck that's going into an account for me specifically. It's actually going to pay current benefits to individuals who are receiving Social Security. And remember, it's not just for old age. Social Security is also going to pay people who are eligible to receive other benefits, such as disability. So the Social Security tax is it's actually three benefits that come out of it. Old age, and that's why it's really not called Social Security. That's kind of our short name for it. I know this is like a sidebar here, but I feel like we talked about this, but maybe not. That's the actual name of the Social Security tax, OASDI. Old age, and yes, we do, you know, we can see that's kind of a bad thing, but that's what it is. You get Social Security for old age. Survivorship benefits. So if you are a child under the age of 18 and you lose a parent, you are eligible to receive survivorship benefits. Okay? And then DI is disability income or disability insurance. Social Security pays benefits to people who are eligible to receive disability. It's not easy to get disability, the Social Security disability, okay? If you have a child that has a disability, you can receive Social Security disability benefits for that child that you're raising. So these are the three benefits that come out of Social Security. So it's not just people who are retired receiving. And the average, I mean, it's about $14,800, something around there, that people are receiving annually. So that's why you say you're never going to live off your Social Security, right? That's not a whole lot of money to live off of. Okay. And the last one, I know we said, you know, we got to minus those tax payments because we don't get to spend that tax money, right? And obviously that's a measure of how much households are able to spend or save, because that's really what we do with our money, right? Or paycheck. We do one or the other. We spend it or we save it. That's all. Those are our options, right? Okay. You guys have any questions about chapter 8? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to chapter 9 then. Chapter 9, I love talking about unemployment. I think it's kind of interesting because we're kind of, I don't know, we hear things on the news in bits and pieces, and we're not all that, I guess, well informed, I suppose is the statement I'll make. I have a handout for us. I'm going to kind of skip through some of these slides pretty quickly. They're here for you guys to take a look at if you want to go back through them. But really, we're going to talk about unemployment and inflation. So, and it's not going to take us that long to go through all this. But it is important. These are really two very important topics in a macroeconomic course and for any kind of basic understanding of economics. So we learned about how to measure total output in chapter 8. And total output was definitely one indicator of how well our economy is perceived to be doing. So we're going to kind of continue along those lines of, you know, measuring the success of the economy, the current state of the economy, by looking at unemployment and inflation. And unemployment, we kind of have I think we have our ideas about unemployment, but this is kind of eye-opening because I think there are some things that we would not know otherwise unless we were talking about them in this class. It says there are more than 300 million people in the U.S., and monitoring and reporting activities for all of those people would be very difficult and very costly. So when we measure unemployment, we have to look at something called the employment population ratio and the labor force participation rate. And again, you have to understand that not all people are being honest, or when being asked what their situation is, even understand what their situation is. And you'll see that when we get to some definitions. So a couple of things. The U.S. Department of Labor reports estimates. So these are estimates. They're not exact numbers. They could never be, because that would mean you would have to poll every single person in the United States that was of a working age. Okay? So we're going to talk about the labor force. That is very simply the sum of everyone that's employed and unemployed who are available to work. See, some people aren't even available to work. Okay, if you're under the age of 16, you're technically not available to work, only in certain circumstances, because we have in this country what we call child labor laws, right? And they may be very different from other countries, especially developing countries, where it's not unusual for small children to work full time. In this country, that's not what kids do. They go to school, or they're supposed to be going to school, right? And if your kid's not in school, then you can get in trouble for that, right? How does the Department of Labor find out this information? Now, I've never been personally polled, so I don't know who they're polling here, but each month, the U.S. Bureau of the Census, maybe you've heard of them, they conduct what they call the Current Population Survey, also known as the Household Survey, okay? And they pick about 60,000 households that are supposed to represent the greater population or the greater majority, okay? They are typically looking for members of households that are of working age, so you have to be at least 16 years of age, okay? And even between 16 and 18, sometimes it's tough to get a job, right? If you try to get a job between 16 and 18, you gotta go have some papers filled out, and you can only do certain things. You're very limited to what you can actually do, okay? You're asked questions about your employment during what's called a reference week, but a lot of people don't even understand what that even means. So you're answering questions about something you don't quite know the definition of. And then you're also going to be asked about recent job search activities, which is also we're kind of opening a can of worms there. Because you would think, well, what's so complicated about asking me a question of my recent job? Did you look for a job last week, yes or no? But it actually isn't that simple, unfortunately. So then we classify people based on their responses to this survey. You are employed, get this. You are considered employed. Okay, having a job, employed. Now, when I say employed having a job, what do you think of? You think of probably going to work every day and working so many hours per day, correct? 1+ hours in a reference week. If you work 1 hour in this reference week that we're going to talk about what week that is, you're employed. Not necessarily, okay? Not necessarily. If you were temporarily away from your job, let's say that you had surgery and you were out for a few weeks, you're still employed, okay? You are considered unemployed if you are not currently working, but you are available for work. Now get this, and this is the important part, and you have actively looked for work during the last month. So if you get laid off, and most people when they get laid off, they're kind of gung-ho, or even after you graduate from college, you're gung-ho to get a job. So you get your resumes ready, you're online all the time, you're checking the sites that you've posted. Maybe you're even out there pounding the pavement. You guys know what that means? You're going door to door and you're talking to people in your hometown, or maybe in the country, in the city in what you want to live, and you're trying to get a job, and you're motivated. But when you start to get rejections and people don't call you back and you're not finding what you're looking for, what happens to your level of motivation? Right? And eventually, you find some stuff on TV that you'd rather be watching than perhaps going out and doing these other things, like Dr. Phil at 3 p.m., Monday through Friday, which is what I would probably, I'd get my stuff done in the morning and then I'd come back and I'd have to watch Dr. Phil at 3. Watch Dr. Phil, you feel a lot better about your life. Or the other one that always makes me feel like I'm doing okay. Oh, for heaven's sakes. The one where oh my goodness, I'll think of it. I'll come back to it when I think of it. Anyway, so if you stop looking for work, guess what? You're no longer considered to be unemployed. You're not even in the labor force. So now you're not counted at all, and you don't have a job. So sometimes these numbers that we hear on the news are a little bit misleading as to what we think they mean, okay? And so there's a nice graphic in your hoarders. That's it. I just thought of it. Hoarders buried alive. Have you seen it? Oh, whoa. Sometimes it's like, like you have to. It's like a train wreck. You have to look, but you don't want to. You got to look. My son had some toe surgery last week, and I'm not the least bit good around anything medical, but I had to watch. And the whole time I'm watching, I'm getting queasy, and I'm thinking, why am I watching this? Because then afterwards I was like, oh, Anyway. That's like hoarders buried alive. Okay, I know this is hard to see up here on the screen, but it's in your book on page 277. So what this is, it's a little flow chart, and you're going to need this flow chart. I got a handout for you guys to work on together. There's some free points for for showing up. And what we have is we have a working age population, okay? So what does that mean even exactly? This is data for 2015, all right? And this is actual data from the Department of Labor. At that time, there was 251.10 million, okay? So what does that mean? Well, 251.10 million people. All right. When we break that working age population, so we can't include people under the age of 16, right? Now, we always say, well, what about at the other end? At the other end, like elderly people, right? Where do we cut off? Do we cut that off anywhere?
What is it, like 45, 50?
Oh no, oh my, geez. Well, watch it there.
That's when a lot of the appropriations are age discrimination.
Well, but technically, even if you're discriminated against, you're still working age, right? I mean, there are people out there working until they're in their 80s now, right? Dr. Fry's mother still goes to work every day. She's in her 80s, okay? She goes to work she works full time. Some people just don't want to stop working, and that's okay. So those people have to be counted, right? Just because you're old, if you're still productive and you don't have a lot of health issues, why not, right? So we have to break that working age population down into two groups. You're either in the labor force or you're not. So being in the labor force means you're either employed or you're unemployed. Now remember, you're only unemployed if you're actively seeking a job in the last month. If you take a hiatus from seeking a job, you're no longer over here, you're over here. Okay? And that affects the employment rate. That affects the employment rate. So you're either employed or you're unemployed. Okay? And that's how we're going to calculate our unemployment rate using these numbers. If you're not, you're in this category. So why would you not be one of these, right? You either have a job or you don't. It is not that simple. You might not even be considered part of the labor force. You're not in the labor force if, guess what? Guess where this includes you. You're not available for work. You're a homemaker. You're a retiree. Okay, so there's a retiree who's not working. So they get thrown in that category. If you're over the age of 67 or something like that, and you're not working. Full-time students, you are not part of the labor force. And you're like, well, I have a job, right? I'm employed. I work at least 1+ hours a week. Okay? But if you're a full-time student, you're not considered in the labor force. Over here, you're not available for work because you're one of those, or you're available for work, but you're not currently working because you are discouraged. You got your motivation levels dropped, you not feel like looking for a job. So that was you over here, right? You were unemployed as long as you were looking. You got discouraged, decided to stay home for a while and not look. Now you're over here, you're discouraged. But you're still unemployed, aren't you? See, the unemployment rate is actually much higher than what's reported because these people aren't included. And then you're not currently looking because of childcare responsibilities, transportation problems, or other. So the formula is not as simple and straightforward as media likes us to think it is. So here's the calculation. So pay attention. This is what you need to know. This is the unemployment rate. It is the most watched rate. In other words, people are always looking to hear what unemployment is. And if you turn on the news every single day on any news channel, they're going to tell you what the unemployment rate is right now currently, because it is the lowest it's been. Okay? And all we do is we take the number of unemployed, so it's that left side of that chart from the previous screen. Look, we take the number of unemployed, 8.03 million in this case, divided by the labor force. And we multiply it by 100 to convert it to a percentage. You can leave it a decimal, but we want to multiply it by 100. So the unemployment rate in 2015 was about 5.1%. If we did this calculation now, if we turn on the news, it's about 3.7% or something like that, which people are ecstatic over. All right? I don't remember in my lifetime it ever being that low since I cared, But this is the most common measurement. And we use this formula. It's pretty simple, but it's the classifications that kind of get tricky. It's not just you either have a job or you don't. It's a little bit more complex than that. All right? Questions so far? All right, I'm going to get a chance to work with this a little bit more. There are some other calculations. So here we go. The labor force participation rate. All right, now again, every time you see this slide, you'll see there's bits and pieces of that main. And actually, when I put this, when I give you guys your handout, I'm going to put the main flow chart back up on the screen so you have it to look at. I know it's not super clear, but at least it's up here. This is the labor force participation rate. So how many people that are actually of working age are actually working or participating in the labor force? So we take our labor force, in this case it's 157.07 million, and we divide it by the working age population, which is 251.1 million in 2015. Obviously these numbers would be different now. Multiplied by 100 just to get that percentage, and 62.6% of the working age population is working. All right? And then the employment population ratio, okay? How many people are actually employed, in this case, is 59.3%. Okay? So those are some basic calculations. You're going to get a chance to look at a couple of those in a handout here momentarily. So here's some problems with this unemployment rate, and I'm going to show you this and then we'll do the handout. But obviously it's not perfect because for two reasons. It understates unemployment. I just said there are people who do not have a job that want a job and are not being counted. So I'm going to show you a graph in a minute or two that shows you what real unemployment would be if we were including those people, okay? And then it may overstate unemployment. People might claim falsely to be actively looking for work. And you actually might be working, but you don't want to say so because you're getting paid under the table. Remember we talked about that the other day? You are employed if you're getting paid under the table, but you don't want anybody to know, anybody of real importance, right? That you can sort of maybe screw that up for you. So it's not a perfect measurement, just like none of these are. So here's the chart I wanted to show you guys. Now look. We have seen a couple videos, and even some of you that did your presentations have used videos where they described what the unemployment was during the recession. Anybody remember around what percentage that was? Unemployment during the recession at the high point. It was between 10 and 11%, right? That's really not what it was. This is our official, the red line is the official measure of unemployment based on the calculation I just showed you. You turn on the news, this is the one you're going to get. If you include people that are, discouraged, they still want a job, okay, so they took a break. And any of those other age groups that we talked about that really are genuinely unemployed, it's going to be more like up here. Now, what would happen, let's take a look. Right here's 2009, and right here, is about 10%, hitting that red line, which is what you guys, reported. Perfectly accurate. If the news would have reported unemployment during the recession of 16 point something percent, what do you think would have happened in this country? Well, more chaos and more panic than we already had with an unemployment rate of 10%. But if we count those people that aren't working, because they are unemployed, the unemployment rate actually would have been more like 16 point something percent. But we don't want to hear that because what did I talk about as far as confidence levels? When confidence levels drop, what also drops? Stock market. Activity in the stock market. People get scared and they pull back. They want to keep their money with them. They're not trusting, right? And so we already had major issues during that time. I can't imagine if the news would have reported that broader measurement of unemployment at 16 point some percent impact that would have had.
But if they report the high one, wouldn't that make like the people who don't have a job go get a job, and then they would have money to?
You would think, but there are people who are perfectly content not having a job, And a lot of times, here's the feeling: like you get laid off, and you think, okay, typically in this state, and I don't know about other states. Maybe you guys, some of you I know live in different states where the unemployment laws are different because it's a state by state thing. But in this state, you are eligible for unemployment for 6 months. So a lot of times people say, that's a long time. That's a long time for me to find a job, so I'm going to take a break. I've been working, and so I'll take this as like a little vacation. And you say, okay, I'll start looking for a job in a month. And a month turns into 2 months, and 2 months turns into 3 months, and you get comfortable watching Dr. Phil every day at 3 o'clock, right? And you suddenly are like, it's 5 months in, and you're like, oh my gosh, my unemployment benefits are running out next month, and I don't have a job. So, the longer you stay complacent like that, that affects this rate too. It's not, everybody's not running out and trying to find another job. And I used to work I worked at a business college where I had a lot of people coming back for retraining. So I worked there for 18 years, and my first 10 years there was a much older student body, because back then states were providing all kinds of funding for getting retraining. And I come from a town where there's factory workers, and a lot of the factories were closing down. So a lot of my students were in their 50s and 60s, had worked in these factories for 25, 30 years, and all of a sudden found themselves without a job, but also found themselves with money to go get educated, which they had never done before. And I will tell you, they make the best students. Somebody who's worked, and not that you aren't good students, I don't mean it like that, but somebody who's worked for 25 or 30 years in a factory and all of a sudden and never had an opportunity to get an education, and somebody's saying, here is a free education for you. Those people work their butts off, you know? This is their first opportunity. They study hard. They put in the extra time. Things like that. You know, but I heard all the time, well, I was making 20 bucks an hour. I was making $18 an hour. I'm not taking a job for less than that. And what happens when you get retrained, you've now gone from someone who was a master at your skill. We had a sewing factory in my town. Okay, I can't sew for the life of me. So they made, actually it was bras and underwear, socks, and things like that. Okay, intimate apparel. Maybe that was a better word I should use. Intimate apparel. I mean, these people were masters at what they did, right? And then all of a sudden they're replaced by machines that are doing the work. So they were experts. They were getting paid a high wage, you know, when they got laid off, when the factory closed. But now they've got retrained in accounting, in medical office administration, or legal office administration. Now they're entry level again, right? Because now they're starting over in a completely different field. And so that takes them from this side. And I would have people say, well, I'm not taking a job for less than that. And I would say, well, isn't some job better than no job, right? Isn't $9 or $10 an hour better than no dollars an hour? But that's not how a lot of people think, you know, especially if you're coming off of a career where you were making decent money and had good benefits and had a retirement plan. Okay? So, you know, a lot of this is kind of there's a little psychology to this as well, I think, as far as, you know, how people feel when they're unemployed or what their perception is, things like that. Here's another interesting trend. I like talking about these things because I think they're really interesting. These are trends in the labor force. Now look, back in 1950, this is the number of women that worked. This is the number of men that worked. That sounds right. You ever seen any of the little shows from the 1950s? You know, Leave It to Beaver, Happy Days. You guys know any of those shows? Yeah, mom stayed at home, right? She wore a skirt and high heels, and she cooked and cleaned in that all day. Dad went to work and came home. That is not what I look like when I'm at home cooking and cleaning. I promise you. You would not recognize me. And you know, Dad went to work, brought home the paycheck, and that's how it was. Made all the decisions. That's kind of how it was. But look at this gap. Actually, it's dropping for men. It's increasing for women as we go through. And this only goes up to 2014. The chart or the line for the men, it keeps declining. Why do you think the labor force of men is shrinking? Women, you see this, women kind of, you know, it's almost peaked here, but it's leveling off. It's about the same as it was 20 years ago. Why do you think the line for the men is decreasing? The labor force participation rate of adult men has declined gradually. So the number of men actually participating, getting a job. Any ideas? How many of you have, so 1950, that was the year, my mother was young though, she was a young mom. My dad was already my dad was 1940s. What didn't they do back in those days, like you are here right now, right? A lot of people didn't go to college, right? There were plenty of jobs that you could get and make a good living right out of high school. So not a lot of men went to college. My father-in-law went to college. He's much older, my husband's dad. He went to college and got a degree. That was very unusual back then. So now we have more men who are, instead of entering the workforce, they're getting educated. And as you guys know, depending on what you want to be, it's not just a 4-year deal sometimes, right? Sometimes it's a 5-year deal or a 6-year deal or an 8-year deal, depending on what you want to do. Okay, so that's affected that too. What else do we have? We see kind of a role reversal. I just explained that sort of those roles in the 1950s, where mom stayed home, cooked and cleaned, and dad went to work. Do you guys know anybody that dad stays home, mom goes to work? No? Yeah. Actually, we have people that work here, professors that work here. You know, female professors who, they're the breadwinners, as we like to call them. You know, they're the ones that bring home the paycheck, and their husbands stay home and take care of the kids. Because childcare is costly. If you don't have a job that, you know, you can actually have money left over after you pay daycare, then it's really not worth working. So one parent will tend to stay home. And who's going to stay home? Well, the parent that probably makes the least amount of money, right, is going to give up the job and stay home. That's not always the woman. It's not always the woman these days. Do you have a question or comment? Yeah. And it says recently the rate for women has also declined. That has, again, something to do with education. You know, going back and getting more educated. I think that's pretty interesting. So it says, we've got 8 million workers missing. Unemployment rate returned to normal after the 2007-2009 recession, but the employment population ratio did not. So this gets into more like sort of an analysis thing. Why? Well, we've got an aging population, so we have baby boomers that are now reaching retirement. So they're no longer part of that formula. Long-term unemployment leading to skill deterioration. So if you were really good at something, you got laid off, and you've been unemployed for long periods of time, there's a good chance that your skills aren't actually needed anymore, right? And then the Affordable Care Act, it says, makes it easier to access health care, because why did most people want a job? People say, I need to get a job, not just to pay the bills, but to have health care, to have insurance. And now with the Affordable Care Act, and I'm not really sure how that's going to be impacted with the current administration, but you didn't need a job to get health care with the Affordable Care Act, right? You did not need a job to do that. Again, some statistics, maybe find it interesting, maybe not. Here's what I say. This is the one that I prefer to look at. Unemployment rates by education level. High school dropouts, unemployment rate. High school graduates, unemployment rate. College graduates. What's the message? Go to college. Do you remember, anybody remember Dr. Miko's speech at the beginning of the semester, if you're a freshman? He said how much money on average you'll make if you go to college versus if you don't. How much more money you'll make over your lifetime if you go to college versus not going to college. $1 million over your lifetime with a college education versus not having one. And that's not for everybody. There's always that outlier, that person who, and college is not for everyone. I'm not saying that college is for everybody. You're all sitting here, so you obviously think college is for you, but there are just some people out there that say, I'm just, there's nothing wrong with going and learning a trade. We need more of that. We do not have enough carpenters, plumbers, and electricians. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just for your college degree here. All right, so before we get too far, I'm going to give you this handout to kind of take a look at. So how long are people typically unemployed? And this is kind of interesting too. I like these kind of statistics. I like statistics of all kinds, but it says during the Great Depression of the 1930s, some people were unemployed for years at a time. That was obviously an unusual situation, right? And long periods of unemployment are bad, obviously, because skills decay and they become more discouraged and more depressed, right? Since World War II, average lengths of unemployment have been relatively low, but that changed dramatically with the 2007-2009 recession. The average length of unemployment more than doubled from 4 months to 10 months. Even states had to even modify their unemployment laws. For example, in Pennsylvania, I said 6 months and then you're off, right? You got to go find a job or you don't get unemployment anymore. However, after the recession, they extended that to 12 months because there just weren't jobs for people to get. Okay? All right, so there's some things on here that we haven't learned yet, but the first side we're going to do. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Take a look at this first side, and then we'll flip it over and learn what's on the back side. All right, I'm going to go back to that one screen so you guys can take a look at it up here. And that's this screen right here. I know it's not all that easy to see. If you have a book, it's on page 277 of your book. The other reason it would be nice if you had a book or you find somebody that has a book is because there's some additional information on those pages there. The pages that come right before and right after that figure 9.1, and even in the explanation of the figure that might be helpful on this handout. We're going to go over it, but I want you to try. So it says, consider the following economic data for a particular area. Now notice I didn't say anything about prisoners, so that's information that you're going to have to look up. It's in your book. adult prisoners, adult employed, adult military personnel. So they're in the military. They're considered employed if they're in the military, but does that count for our employment rates? Children under the age of 16, employed adult civilian. What's a civilian? I'm a civilian, right? I'm not in the military. That's just everybody that's not in the military. Unemployed adult civilians seeking work. So those people actively seeking. Unemployed adult civilians not seeking work, and then adult retirees. So I would like you, there are 4 rates there that we're going to try to calculate. The working age population, the size of the labor force, the unemployment rate, and then the labor force participation rate. So you need to figure out which of those groups are going to be included or not included, I guess you could say it either way, in those particular calculations. So I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes to take a look at that. So working age population is that big number at the top, right? Your only option is if you are in the labor force. If you're not in the labor, or well, actually, your working age population is the sum of those two. That's the first one that you're looking at there. The working age population, total first. I'll give you a hint for the first one. There's only one category that would not be included in the working age population.
It's constituting source.
Again, this is not as straightforward as it obviously as it appears in on the news even. You know, we kind of think you either have a job or you don't have a job. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. So just try to get some numbers. We'll go over it here in a minute. In other words, the working age population are just those people that legally can work, I guess, only because of their age, technically. So that should help too. There's only one category that does not include. Don't argue over an unemployment rate.
Oh, no, yeah, I wasn't sure.
So working age population, there's only one category you shouldn't include. That should be obvious to you. Who's not allowed to work? Yeah, it's probably just to make sure you're categorizing this right. Okay, so for part A, the working age population, that's that top number, okay? Anybody who's of age that legally works, even if you're a retiree, you still work. You can retire, right? You're of legal age. The only group that's not of legal age is children under the age of 16. So that first number, the only one you should include that number. Okay, that number, part B, the size of the labor force. The labor force is just anybody that can be considered employed or unemployed. So part B, look up here. Part A, the only group you're not going to include in the working age population is which group? Who's not legally allowed to work? Children under the age of 16. That's the only group that doesn't get included up here. This part B wants to know what this number is, labor force. So you're either employed or you're unemployed, but you got to be careful about the definition of unemployed. That's the number you're going to have to look up in your book. Which categories does unemployed include? Now I have a category that says civilians, unemployed civilians, right? But what about those other categories? That's going to be the question for some of those other ones. It's not that straightforward. That's the whole point of this exercise, is for you to realize it is not that straightforward. But I think it's so interesting. Don't fret if you don't think your answer's not right. I will also give you a hint. The unemployment rate in this is really high, like unrealistically high. If you're not seeking, you're not in the labor force. You're over here, right? You're over here. You're either discouraged or you got child care issues. You're over here not even counted. Again, which is why it's really not that accurate of a number. You have to be actively looking to be counted as unemployed. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are unemployed, not able to actively look for because of their current situation, but would love to have a job. So as far as your labor force, it's going to only be the people that are employed. Okay? So look in your book. You can't count them. You can't count them. You can't count them. So these are the employed people, right? And then anybody that is unemployed, which would be people that are actively seeking, it's just them. So it's just those two. These are not seeking, they actually don't, they're over here. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be great. That would be the difference between the two. So then unemployment is, yes, you have your total work, you're looking at the labor force. This number is this number. So you're taking unemployed, you're taking 200 divided by the whole. Yeah, so the unemployed workers who are seeking divided by, in that formula, which is on the next screen, I guess. That's where we get our formula. Going to be divided by the labor force. The labor force is this number right here, Maria, right? Okay. So yeah, once you get your number for part B, in part C then, you can calculate the unemployment rate. Another minute or two, and then we're going to take a look at it. Stay awake. Cold. Yeah, I don't like it either. It's the last thing. My daughter was telling me I was like hacking and coughing all over. My son's like, she's getting nervous. All right. Enough discussion? You want to get these numbers up here? All right, so the first one, the working age population is everything but children under the age of 16. So, and I'm not going to write all the categories, but we're going to do the 150. I mean, people in prison are working age. Doesn't mean they're working, doesn't mean they're categorized as anything else, but they are of a working age, right? So we've got, then we've got employed adult military personnel. They are of working age. Okay, that's the top number, so we include them. We have children under the age of 16, they're not of working age. They're not old enough to work, right? We've got child labor laws that protect them. So then we've got employed adult civilians, right? We've got unemployed adult civilians seeking work. We count them. We also have unemployed not seeking. We count them because, again, this is the big number at the top. And then we have retirees. Just because they're retired doesn't mean that they couldn't work if they didn't want to. They're certainly of age to work, right? There is no cutoff. We're not going to tell somebody because you're 75 you can't work anymore. That's called age discrimination, right? We can't do that. Laws protect older people over the age of 40, by the way. Thanks for reminding me, Skylar. Okay, so what's that number? 2,500, right? Okay, does everybody understand why that number is what it is? All right, so letter B. I wrote letter B and I was going to say too. The size of the labor force. So look, all we're looking at here now is this number, right? So that's only two categories. You're either employed or you're unemployed. You got to be careful with the unemployed one. All right, so that one's pretty simple actually. It's the employed adult civilians, okay, plus unemployed adult civilians seeking work. And actually, that's just those two categories. So that's the employed versus unemployed. That's those two blocks there. So that's 1,250. Now, specifically excluded from that, and this came right out of your textbook, are adult prisoners, military personnel, obviously children, right? Unemployed adults who are not seeking, and adult retirees. We don't count any of them. All right? So when I go to calculate the unemployment rate, that's part C, right? The unemployment rate is part C. I'm taking the number of unemployed, how many are unemployed that I'm actually allowed to count. That's this number, right? Unemployed. If I were to put this out in the chart, right? Divided by what's my total labor force? We just calculated that in B, didn't you? I keep forgetting the multiple because I like decimals, but I'll switch this to a percentage here. So what do you get there? It's high. I told you it was going to be high, right? 16%. Yeah, that's high. Okay? Does everyone understand why I used the numbers that I used? You sure? Okay. Specifically cannot count those other people. They're all on that right side of that flow chart. They're all under not in the labor force. All right? And then lastly, the labor force participation rate. which we're going to take the labor force. Do we have that number? We do, right? It's the labor force. We already have that number. That's this number right here. We just calculated that in part B. So we're going to take the labor force and we're going to divide by the working age population, which is the very first one we calculated, which is the 2,500. We don't really even need a calculator, do we? So half of people that are of age to work are actually working. I think that's a fun little worksheet. Now there's a backside to it, but we didn't get that far just yet. So don't throw that out, or whatever it is you might do with it. We're not done. Okay. I'm going to actually skip over that. I'm going to skip over that. Actually, what's really interesting is after the Department of Labor comes up with employment rates, they go back and they adjust them. They just don't tell you. If you go to the website and there's actually adjustments, they say, oops, we made a mistake, because data comes in later. They typically do these every month, these estimates every month. Well, we all know what estimates are, right? They're educated guesses. And so if they have information later on that then kind of makes that number wrong, they do have to publish it, or they do publish it, but we don't tend to hear about it. So they do make revisions. So this is kind of what's interesting to me. These numbers here, these are all negatives, right? Those are revisions that the Bureau of Labor, that the Department of Labor, actually revisions that they made. They underestimated how bad it really was during 2007 and 2009. So they went back later on, and that's how off they were on some of their estimates. That's encouraging, huh? Okay. So we have different kinds of unemployment. So let's talk about this. 3 types of unemployment. Perhaps you've heard the news, and in the news the reporter says, unemployment is 3.7%. We are currently at full employment. And you're like, well, how is that possible? If we're at full employment, should unemployment be what? 0? Unemployment will never be 0. So no, actually, that's not true. That's why we need to understand what these words mean. So 3 types of unemployment. We have something called frictional unemployment. And this is short-term unemployment that arises from the process of matching workers with jobs. So when you guys get out of college, right, and you're looking for a job, you're frictionally unemployed. If I were to lose my job and try to find another job, I'm frictionally unemployed. The second one is structural unemployment. And that's unemployment that arises from a persistent mismatch between the skills and attributes of workers and the requirements of the job. So in other words, I'm a seamstress, and all of a sudden now they bring in all these machineries to replace me. Now my skills aren't any good anymore. So it's going to take me a while, because I'm going to have to get retrained. So I'm going to have to learn a new skill, right? Because my current skill is of no use. It's outdated, right? Then there's cyclical unemployment, and that's unemployment caused by a recession. So what did we have in 2007, 2009? What kind of unemployment? Mostly cyclical, right? Okay, so we're going to take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. There we go, frictional. This is normal, by the way. Frictional unemployment occurs because of job search, entering or re-entering the labor force or in between jobs. It also occurs because of seasonal unemployment. Some jobs fluctuate in availability due to seasonal demand, like a ski instructor or farm work or a construction worker, right? It's not uncommon for construction workers, especially in this part of the United States, to get laid off when the weather is what it is outside right now, because you can't be out on a roof in this. Well, you could be, but I wouldn't recommend it, right? It would be more dangerous than being out on a roof than, what's normally considered dangerous when you're out on the roof. All right? To control for the seasonal unemployment, when you go onto the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, they actually have 2 numbers they report. They adjust it for seasonality, and then there's one that they report without taking those seasonally employed people out of there. Some frictional unemployment actually increases economic efficiency by allowing for better job matches. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing all the time. We consider unemployment a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Structural unemployment, I mentioned this one already, obviously. These are going to be longer unemployment spells because you probably need retrained to bring you up to, speed with technology. Your job that was once done by hand is now been replaced by a robot or machines. In accounting, they're talking about robots doing tax returns, which would be fine with me because I don't really like to do taxes, and I only do the ones for my family. You know how that goes. Can you do my tax return? Sure, I can do your tax return. Okay. Anyway, something else I heard lately, not too long ago, about robots doing something, and it freaked me out. I don't remember what it was, though, that they're going to do. I don't know. Cyclical. All right, pay attention to this one. Obviously caused by a business cycle recession. In normal recoveries after a recession, unemployment due to cyclical factors will fall. When all employment, listen carefully, is due to frictional and structural. Frictional being the normal stuff. You guys get it. Graduate and you're looking for a job for a few months. That's frictional. That's normal. Structural is even normal. Hey, I lost my job. I need retrained. I might be unemployed a little bit longer, but eventually I'm going to get back into the workforce. When that's the only two kinds of unemployment you have, you're never going to have zero unemployment. There's always going to be somebody that falls into one of those two categories. But when you have no cyclical unemployment, because that's due to a recession, then the economy is considered to be at full employment. That's why we're considered to be at full employment right now in this current economy, because we're not in a recession. And again, that 3.7% unemployment is thought to be all frictional or structural unemployment, no cyclical right now, because we're not in a recession. People are not getting laid off because we're in a recession. Okay? There aren't enough people for the jobs out there currently. And we call that the natural rate of unemployment. Now it says the general consensus is that in the US it's typically on average somewhere between 5 and 5.5%, which is why everybody's boasting right now and so happy because it is so low, it's 3.7 or whatever it is. Make sense? So full employment, that's what you need to know. Okay. Turn your paper over that I gave you, the handout we just got done doing those calculations on, flip it over. On the back side, you have question number 2 is what type of employment in this? Tell me if it's cyclical, structural, or frictional, depending on those 3 scenarios. Now, there's one for each of them, one for each, okay? I'll actually go back to the screen where all 3 definitions are on that screen. There we go. See if you can guess A, B, and C, which one's which. If you read them, they're not that hard, but you have to actually read them. So workers in a high-end restaurant are laid off when the establishment experiences a decline in demand during what? Hello? Do we know which one that is? That's not hard, right? A group of automobile workers lose their job as a result of a permanent reduction. These workers are going to be retrained, right? In order to get them some future employment opportunities. Might take a little longer, but they will. And then the last one, new college grad spends 3 months searching for her first job until she finds one. Those are pretty obvious, right? So number 1 is what? Cyclical. Number 2, structural. Number 3, frictional. Yes. So cyclical, structural, frictional, or cyclically unemployed, structurally unemployed, frictionally unemployed. Now I'm going to ask you to do that last section, part 3, for Tuesday. Okay, part 3, you have to tell me if that individual, based on the situation, is considered employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force. So your options are E, U, or N. We'll discuss each of those on Tuesday. All right, folks, be safe out there if you're traveling. Actually, if you're walking, be careful. I don't want anybody to fall. And have a safe and good weekend.